This is 𝗕ន់populi, podcast for the people.
Hey, good morning, or I guess it's good afternoon. I guess it doesn't really matter. Scott, how you doing? Welcome to the Born or Made podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting. So I always try to start off kind of light. So where am I talking to you from? What part of the country?
I live in Manhattan, aka New York City.
Oh, really? So you like there's high rises all around you and
Yes, I'm in a 15-story building. There's another one across the street. There's a 40-story tower a block and a half from me. Lots and lots of tall buildings.
no kidding. So do you ever get used to that? I mean, I mean, I live on a farm, so I mean, I don't have anything, I have a 100-foot tree around me maybe.
I love the city. I like, I live in a part of town called the Upper West Side, which is it's alongside Central Park, and I love both being near the park and being around all these people. For me, it's all about the people. I feel like I'm in a little village. New York is really made up of small villages, really.
Yeah, and I mean, crazy. I live in Virginia. I've never been there, and my brother loves going there because he just thrives off the energy of the town. Like it's just hustle bustle.
Oh, you plug in. The first year I was here, which was 2003, it was like plugging into a battery. It was unbelievable.
Really? So let's figure some stuff out then how you got there. But so where were you born at? So are you a New York guy or where were you born and raised at?
I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. So
Oh, really? Okay.
big town with a lot of history and fewer tall buildings, but very much a city that most people know and love.
Absolutely. So you were born there. Did you stay there your whole life? Kind of where'd you go to grade school, middle school, high school? How did all that where did you go from there?
I was born in New Orleans. I was there until I was 18 when I left for college, and I felt like I was in a different gear than I just knew I needed to get into a bigger city, and so one of my I had not a lot of rules about where I was going to go to college. I wanted it to be 1,000 miles away. I wanted it
Okay.
to be in a city with a lot of people, and so I ended up going to Penn in Philadelphia. And from there, I moved to Boston, and then I moved to New York over a period of from 18 to 28.
Did you like Boston?
I loved Boston.
Yeah.
It's Boston is, to my mind, a small town that sort of thinks of itself as a big town, and I love that about it because you kind of get to know people, and it's very walkable. That probably will come up a bunch. I love the idea of being able to walk around wherever you live, that the idea of living without a car and that where a car is not your main vehicle is a big deal to me. And so Boston was really fun. Um, I did have a car there because I was always traveling for work and things like that. But it was a really cool town with a ton of history, and every little place around the Boston area each has like serious history and stories and personality. It's a great place.
Yeah, I've only been there a couple of times. I always like Boston. I don't even know. It's funny you say it's a, big small town or small big town. I don't know what it is about that town. It's like Chicago to me. There's something about the downtown part of Chicago that I just love. And again, I live out in the middle of nowhere and I'm super comfortable. But when I go to those places, I'm like, okay, it's not for me. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but I can see why people live in those towns.
I traveled so much in my 20s all around the country, and we can talk more about that. And what I love is when a place feels like a place. I have three kids, and their grandma, my wife's mother, lives in New Jersey. And when we go else around the country, sometimes they're like, "Dad, this feels like New Jersey," meaning like it just doesn't feel. It just feels like a suburb, like a generic place. And not to knock anybody who lives in New Jersey, but I love it when a place has its own character.
Really? And so do you have a car now?
I don't. I've managed to have three kids and get around the city, and we don't have a car. It's not, I mean, we if my kids became like athletes that needed to be
Yeah.
traveling all the time for soccer or hockey or whatever, we would get a car, but we've just never felt the need. We get around, we get cars all the time. We just don't own one.
So do they have the thing there where you can, I mean, there's a place, I think Aspen has this where like there's like cars that you can rent that they just leave in certain parking spots. Do they do that in New York or you
They
just get in?
do. So
Okay.
we take advantage of all those different options.
Yeah.
But it's crazy. I sell, here, and by the way, I will say this. I have clients who've spent 15, $20 million on a beautiful apartment, like the penthouse in a building, and they don't own a car either. So I don't feel it's a choice. And most of my day, if I'm not on the subway or on a scooter, I take an electric scooter, I'm in the back of a car. I'm in a car all the time. It's just I'm not behind the wheel. And by the way, I think I'm ahead of the curve, right? Soon we're going to have self-driving cars. We won't need to worry about it anymore.
Well, I mean, I tell you what, the self-driving thing, and now I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal this week about like the AI thing is going to help accelerate that. I personally am all for it because like I think about like my father, Cheryl's mother, they need to get to the doctor. I mean, what an incredible asset to be able to just to hop in a car and have it take you to where you need to go.
Oh, it's going to be a game changer for people who are living alone, who may have, like, because we've always felt this uh, pressure to, like, I mean, in New York, for instance, often older people, if they can afford it, are really thrilled to move into the city because they're surrounded by people and they can walk. If somebody happens to live in a house that they want to stay in and they're in the suburbs, they're not going to be trapped anymore. I mean, Uber has solved some of that, but I think this takes it to the next level.
Well, there was an article written. It's been several years ago. It's probably not going to be your kids. I don't know how old they are, but like their kids, there may be people that will never learn how to drive because of autonomous vehicles. Think about that as a country that we pride ourselves. I mean, my wife has a Suburban. She's in that thing she didn't drive much, but 90% of the time, she's the only person in it.
Right. No, it will change the way we live. And I feel I drove so much in my 20s. I was on tour all the time. And, we were logging 60 to 100,000 miles a year. It's us and truckers. And, all we did was live in the back of an RV. And I don't miss it. I mean, New York is endlessly interesting, but, if I end up in the back of the car, doing something else, thinking, maybe watching a movie, whatever, I've done a lot. I did travel during COVID. We took an RV trip from New York City. Imagine pulling an RV into New York City, and we drove down to New Orleans, and that was a really fun road trip. We went there and back, and I love America. It's an incredibly diverse, and it's a place with so much a variety of scenery, and I love that about it. But being behind the wheel, I can take it or leave it.
Isn't that funny? So, so let's talk about this travel thing. So you get out of college, and so what are you traveling for? What are you doing? You said you're on tour.
Yeah. So what I found when I started real estate when I was 28, I didn't realize that real estate was going to end up using every skill I had ever built in the 10 years between or even before college until I was 28. But when I graduated college, I moved to Boston and I started working at a music booking agency. So I was putting bands on the road. And so I got a ton of skills dealing with colleges, bringing concerts to college campuses. And then I also was performing myself. So I was getting to know people and what made them tick. And so I was on the road, but I was kind of wearing two hats. So I was getting like all of this experience doing sales. And frankly, when I moved to New York and I started doing real estate, most of the time it felt very natural. I was just listening to people and what they needed. real estate was always a people first practice for me. It was like, how can I help you? And then real estate would happen to become the vehicle for what I had always done, making matches, right? I meet you, I listen to what you're about, I get to know you. I maybe hear, oh, I'm looking to do this, and I'm looking to do this, and I'm like, oh, wait, you should meet this person. And so I became like the bartender. I've always been someone who listens. And then I would make these matches. I'd help somebody get a job, or I'd introduce a guy to a vendor that was like the biggest deal that they've had in their business, or somebody's looking to do a philanthropy, and I'd connect the philanthropy to what became their biggest donor. It was like all of these matches, and then I was learning real estate, and then it all came together. But I started really just becoming good at what was hard sales, getting college kids to agree to spend money to put, a band on campus. It was like, if I could do that, real estate was a lot easier than most people think it is. At least for me.
All right, well, that's a good place to stop for just a second. We'll take a quick break. Okay, we're back now. So, you're going all over the place. You're doing this stuff. So did you do like bands? Like what was your favorite band? I mean, I'm always kind of intrigued. By the way, my favorite band is Boston.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah. So that tells you my age.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of we put bands into college campuses. So you can imagine a spring big concert on a campus. Somebody it's a big field. We would produce, I mean, this is 20, I started real estate 21 years ago, right? So I'm dating myself a little bit, but bands like Dave Matthews Band and other, bands that were contemporary at the time, hip hop acts. We maybe put a really random assortment of things together, but it was always the band's on tour and they want to hit a few college campuses that they don't have to promote it. It's a baked in audience. And so we would talk to big booking agencies, and we were the middleman between the agency and the college kids. And so we built a reputation as being somebody who could get the deals done. We had to be creative. The day of the week was important, and so on and so forth. And then, put it all together. So again, all these skills in terms of bringing like complicated, everybody in that transaction.
And very different, personalities. Yeah. Oh, for sure.
There was a story once we were backstage and the performing artist was a really popular guy from the Wu-Tang Clan. If people have heard of that band, they're like epic hip hop legends. And the guy comes up to me and to my boss at the time with a chainsaw on. And he's like, they always got paid some before the show and then after they performed. That's just the nature of how booking goes. And he wanted to get paid in full right then. And I just watched my boss say, get on the stage, like just kind of give it right back. And so you watch that go on, you're like, I think I can handle like an angry buyer or seller in real estate.
With the chainsaw?
It was crazy.
Okay, that's one I've never heard. That would there's a lot of very scary movies came out with chainsaws, so that brings a lot of terror to most people.
Well, he wasn't gonna do.
I know, but still, it's just like that's not.
It was for show.
Yeah.
It caused quite a stir.
So you doing all this stuff, and then you pivot. Now what made you go to real estate? I mean, you're still in Boston.
Right, I'm still in Boston at the time. And all of this happened right around 9/11. So my band was doing well. We had all of the support we had a new album coming out, and we were all excited about what that meant. And then our album just happened to drop on 9/11, like the day of. And as horrible as that was, I'm not saying that our band lost all of its momentum, which is like pales in comparison to what happened on 9/11, but it devastated us. And I was like, do I want to spend 2 more years building this band back, or do I want to figure out what's next for me? And I wasn't from Boston. I'd always traveled to New York. New York always was like this exciting place for me to go. And I said, you know what? I'm going to move to New York. And I fumbled around a bit for a few months, really kind of scrapping and really almost like running out of money. And my stepmom, and I know this happens to so many people, but people know you better than you know yourself.
Yeah.
And she said to me, hey, I think you'd be really good as a real estate agent. It's not something I'd ever considered, except that my dad is a commercial landlord in New Orleans, and my mom worked for a residential brokerage on the marketing side in New Orleans. So it was in the air, or it's almost like I was a fish and someone said, hey, you should breathe some water. And I'm like, what's water? You know? So
And you're in it. You don't
I'm
even
in it
know.
already.
Yeah.
I'm in it already. So I took all the skills and I said, let me go get my license. And I started at the beginning of 2003, and it was like a fish to water. Um, and right out of the gate, I realized, oh, I'm pretty darn good at this.
And you were doing this, so you went from Boston, you come to New York,
Come to New
hat in
York
hand,
without, right,
yeah, just like,
from
what am I going to do
zero.
when I grow up? You're sitting here, you're 28-ish at this point.
Right, 28 years old. I realized that I needed to, it wasn't, oh, I got to get serious now. It was like, let me just give this a shot. At the time, real estate agents made like $40,000 a year across the country on average. This was not
Oh yeah.
a lucrative, this is not necessarily this lucrative business if you look at it on its face, but it was, I needed to give something a shot. I'd sort of gotten to the end of my rope and I'm like, either it's this or I may end up going home with my tail between my legs,
And so you get your license. And so tell me about your first deal in the big city of New York.
You go through some sales training. This was a company that focused on rentals. So my first real estate job was just doing rentals, which doesn't work in most places, but 70% of the real estate here there are hundreds of thousands of rental apartments. Get my training, and I ended up, at the time you had like, call it Web 1.0. We were advertising on the website and we were using Craigslist to get clients. So between those, I met a young guy. He wanted to rent an apartment. I had something in Chinatown, and Chinatown is still a little rough and tumble. And I ended up renting him a third floor walk up in this like dingy building that was it was like a 2-bedroom apartment for, at the time, probably $1,500. And I didn't know anything from anything. I just knew the guy was a nice guy. I wanted to help him. And there was another apartment in the same building. And I was like talking to somebody else. I don't know how this happened. You sort of forget some of these things. I ended up renting a second apartment in the same building to an art dealer for his artists who were coming into town. So it was like I was off to the races, but it was really mostly hustle and care. It was like I wanted to help people, didn't really know what I was doing, but I was willing to like figure it out because I always figured it out. Like that was something I always did in my whole life. If I didn't know what to do, figured it out.
Yeah, well, that's a great thing for people to listen to because you find people that are super successful in businesses, they just learn to figure it out. They pivot, they do what they got to do to get it done. Because it wasn't like you were getting a $20,000 commission check. I mean, when you did these, yeah, I mean.
Real estate is eat what you kill. I mean, which is a terrible metaphor because I
never heard it that way, but I'm a hunter. Yes. Yeah. So I get it.
But yeah, you start with zero, and the way that company worked was you needed to do a certain amount of deals or you washed out. The first, I remember like the first 6 deals you did were at a lower commission rate because they wanted to see like, is this guy going to get it done and graduate, so to speak. And it was like, I just didn't think about it. I'm like, I'm going to go make this happen. And I was like, I think I was the agent of the year in that office. And I just hustled. I was there 7 days a week, first guy in the office. Like if you got in first, you could sign up on this thing. So if walk-ins happened, you would be the person they talked to. And whatever it was, I did it. And I remember dating a girl at the time, and I couldn't see her. Like I never got to see her. And she was mad at me because I didn't make any time for her, but I was trying to build this business, She's not my wife now. It was an old, now I met a girl 2 years later, that became my wife. But I remember at the time, this girlfriend was so angry with me.
That's funny. Okay, well, that's a good place. We'll take a quick break. All right, Scott. So welcome back. So we're going through. You've done all you're now hot and heavy into real estate. You're obviously committed to this. You're doing rentals now. Where do you pivot to start doing actual real estate sales? We'll call it.
For those people who've never spent a lot of time going behind the scenes with a real estate agent, the first few years you spend a lot of time working with buyers. So the natural transition was at some point to say, I really need to get out of rentals. It never felt like consistent with who I was. I was really good at it because I was good at sales, but it felt too transactional. And so I needed to get out of the rental side of the business into the sales side. So like my first, about a year and a half in, I met a woman who wanted to buy an apartment. And I think she may have looked for rental or sale, which is how I met her. And then we found her what still is the smallest sale deal I've ever done in my career, which was a $220,000 sale. It was in a lot of markets, even today in 2024, talked to a guy who's like the #1 real estate agent in Rochester, New York. The average sale price there is $150,000, right? So that would
Oh yeah.
even now would be normal. But I did one deal with this wonderful Italian woman, and that worked out great. And I felt like, wow, I helped her move forward in her life. This is exciting. And pretty soon I moved companies. I started working with Barbara Corcoran's company. She had built a company here called the Corcoran Group, and then she had sold it right before I joined. And I was there for 2 years. And during that time, I really ramped up the sales side of my business and was having like a great year and a great year and sort of slowly easing out of the rental side. And then in
But you're
2000,
focusing on residential.
all residential.
Residential. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And still you're in the city of New York.
In Manhattan, I'm doing sales in Manhattan and Brooklyn, near Brooklyn, because it's just over the bridge. And at that time, I met my wife, and we started realize this is going to be something serious. And in 2007, 4 years into real estate, I made a move with a big group of people to the company where I am today, Brown Harris Stevens. I've been here for 18 years. It's been a fantastic ride with them. It's privately held, great support, and I shifted, full tilt into the sales side of business.
Okay, and so you change at 2007. I'm not in real estate. I own real estate, but I'm in construction. Hence comes 2008. I'm assuming I was so hyper focused on surviving my business. I'm assuming things got bad in New York as well.
Well,
You're not selling stuff at that point, right?
Right. So it was actually our market was kind of the way I describe it, it was the last to be affected and the first to rebound in that time. But there was 1 year from third quarter of '08 to third quarter of '09 when I could have just gone on vacation. I could have just left. In fact, I had a newborn and my wife was working for the French government. We could have gone to France. You know what I'm saying? And it was a real time of like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? And what I ended up doing, it's so funny. As we're recording this, I just spent 4 days at a Tony Robbins seminar.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He'll motivate you.
It was 2008 when things were really shaky in the real estate market that I listened. Somebody gave me a whole a stack of CDs that I turned into MP3s, and I listened sitting on a park bench near my office for a month. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And it totally changed the way I looked at real estate and business and my personal life. And it was like, all right, I'm going to take some action here. And it was during that time kind of forged when I realized it was time to think about this real estate thing a little bit more seriously. And I looked back on that time and what are my goals for 2010? And a few years later, I realized I accomplished all of them. And it really was like this incredibly magical shift in my business.
So do you ever is it always like resells, like pre-existing construction, or is there actually new construction as well in New York?
Well, that's a great question. If you come to New York, you're going to, right now, if you go to Central Park, you're going to see a whole slew of really they call them super tall buildings on the south side of Central Park. And those are all most of them are along 57th Street, and they popped up during the last, call it 10 years.
Those are the ones that are like super expensive. Like the one that there's one of them that's like, looks like it's all glass. I think I've seen, I guess they all kind of look that way, but I've seen some of the views on the internet, and these things are amazing. Like these are real big apartments or condos or whatever they call them.
They're all condos. And so yes, there are new buildings, new builds, and sometimes they take a rental building and they convert it to condominium. That's something that was going on for a long time. So I would get involved with a developer. In fact, the reason I moved to Brown Harris Stevens in 2007 was I was part of a team at the time, and we had the chance to work on a brand new building that was going up on the south side of Madison Square. People might know Madison Square. It's where Danny Meyer created the first Shake Shack inside Madison
really?
Square.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And
so this is kind of 09, 010.
This is 07.
7. Okay, this
when
is
I moved
pre-collapse.
So I was working on that building in their sales office all the time and meeting I'll call them captains of industry, people who are super successful. We put in a contract the first $30 million property below 34th Street. That was like a huge thing. Rupert Murdoch owned a big apartment there for a while. And so I got a lot of experience working with new development there, which I've ever since always felt very comfortable helping people buy and sell new development. But yes, the bulk of what I do is work on resales. So things that there are buildings here that are 100+ years old.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we do are not just condo sales, but also what they call co-op sales.
So what does co-op mean? Is it to be?
It's a different ownership structure. The idea is that it's almost like a club, like a country club. To get in, you have to be approved by the co-op board.
Oh, okay.
And it's really a different animal for a lot of people coming in here. But the nice thing is that everybody in the building is very qualified. In New York City, you see next to zero defaults. So it's a mechanism that if you're going to live vertically with people, you want to make sure that there's enough money to cover all the operating expenses of a building, and that's how this ownership structure.
So the co-op is by the building, typically.
Yeah, yes. By the
building, and then so you actually have owners of the condos are part of the board that approve those people. Is that how it works? Okay.
Exactly. So there's just like in a condo, you have a board. In a co-op, you have a co-op board. And I actually write a lot about this in the book that's coming out next year. That if you think getting a mortgage is emotionally straining for people because they feel like, oh gosh, you have to jump through so many hoops. Imagine a board of people that are staring down every aspect of your entire financial life and personal life and deciding if you're good enough. It's quite a gauntlet to run through.
No kidding. I mean, talk about pressure. Like I remember when my kids went to this little private school in Fredericksburg, called Fredericksburg Christian. And we were so nervous that our kids, if they go to an interview, I can't imagine, especially at that level, because I'm sure these aren't $100,000 condos. So it's real.
These are big, these are expensive properties, and the people applying for them often are doing incredibly well. They're wealthy. People have millions of dollars in the bank, and yet they still feel like they're being put under a microscope, and you just never know what's going to trigger them. What's going to all of a sudden make the buyers kind of lose their focus and get very upset. So, I mean, I'm always meeting people when they're at their most stressed. It's not my fault, of course. It's just the nature of the beast. But we have to really hold their hand in a way that helps them navigate that process.
Do you find that with your reputation that you're helping with that? I mean, I would think that if you were bad, obviously people wouldn't use you, because if you're taking them to a specific co-op and you bring those people there, that's got to give the board some comfort that you're bringing a client that's probably going to qualify.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I would say that works best on the broker level, on the other side. So if I bring a buyer the other agent, the person representing the seller, knows that I've already vetted them, but I still have to show all of their financial, we have to show them a balance sheet and help them get comfortable. But the co-op board itself, if I'm representing the seller, it's the same situation. I have to vet the buyer before we decide to proceed with them. So there's like a multi-level, multi-step process. But yes, I think it's reputationally, does it help me get my foot in the door? Yes. But I have to also make sure I'm working with people, and then I can tell the story of these people in a way that's going to help them move forward. And you wouldn't believe it. I mean, you know, as you can imagine, it's not just like, here I am, I'm a doctor, I make this much money, and on we go. People are in private equity, and the way that they're paid is very complicated, or they're working at Google, and they get a lot of they get shares of stock that they can exercise to purchase. So it becomes a whole school of understanding finance on top of real estate. It's quite complicated at times.
Wow. Okay, we're going to take a quick break real quick, and we'll be right back. Okay, Scott, so you were talking about all that, you know, as far as the co-ops and stuff like that. And that sounds complicated. I didn't even know that world existed. So thank you for sharing. So does this segue into allowing you, like you sell a particular condo to one client and then suddenly now they want to buy a place, you know, somewhere else? Does that help you sell them real estate in other areas, or how does that work? Because these are real clients. I mean, these clients can afford to buy things all over the place.
What I would say is that as a real estate, like I've said before, real estate is like the vehicle that I use to help people move forward.
Yeah.
So I'm always helping people with just about anything. You know, I'm meeting so many different people that I get to, you know, I'm connecting them to whatever they need. But I get calls saying, hey, I want to buy something in the Hamptons, which is the summer playground for people in Manhattan. I send them to agents there. Or, you know, I have a client who I helped buy a townhouse in Brooklyn for $4 million 10 years ago. And then they want to help their parents buy a place in the city. So we help them with that. And then his sister wants to spend $10 million in the city. So it's like any business in that you do a good job and you get raving fans, and then they send you to other friends, and it builds on itself. And that ends up being the annuity. The relationships are the annuity to your business. And it's fun because, you know, you get to know more people, and it just, you want to genuinely help them. You do the best you can, and usually it works out pretty well.
No kidding. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I just didn't know. So, on the new stuff that you're doing, that's on the south side of Central Park area, is that still going pretty well? Cause I know there's been some stuff that said, it wasn't going so well, but I mean, there's some big units there. I mean, some of those units are selling for what, 30, 40, or is it 100? I don't remember the number. There were some crazy numbers.
Yes, there have been transactions. Ken Griffin, who runs Citadel, a big hedge fund, spent about $200 million on a property on, I think at the time it was the largest residential apartment transaction in the country. And so you have those size transactions. And a lot of real estate north of $10 million in New York, and that's part of my business, but not all of my business. I have a team of 10, so we service a lot of buyers and sellers at very different price points. But that's a want to have. It's not a need to have. So if the pricing if we can put a deal together, then the deal will come together. And 60+% of our transactions are all cash, right? So it's a very liquid market. The buyers have lots of cash. And we've seen, as much as there's been limited inventory across the country, in Manhattan, there's been a little bit more inventory because of all the co-op stuff we talked about. It's harder to pass muster, and people overprice their apartments at times because people are people. But the smart money is taking taking down a lot of apartment right now. The sales volume it continues, and it's actually picked up quite a lot. We've had our two best years in business, 23 and 24, which are arguably the hardest years in real estate that the country has seen. Certainly in the 20 years I've been doing this, it's the hardest market I've seen. But um, in New York, the focus is just people who want to transact. I know, it's not, you have to spend a lot of time talking to people to understand who's real and who's kicking the tires. But we have really talented agents that work on my team, and together we've been able to get a lot done.
So everybody leaves from 2020, right? March 13th, the day I remember the world kind of changed. So there was a huge exodus from New York. A lot of people are down in Florida and stuff like that. You're seeing people coming back, because I've heard prices had kind of come down, but then a lot of people, the smart money's coming in and trying to buy up real estate, and that's what you're seeing.
It's sort of a yes and. So when you see, oh, these people are leaving, like there's always turnover in New York City. People come in for a couple years, then they move back to Fredericksburg, or where you are, they move back to Buffalo or whatever. And they can say, oh yeah, I did 2 years in New York and it was really fun. And then I was ready to go back home or whatever. And so you have constant turnover on the rentals. So what happened is you just had an exodus of people who went back to live with mom and dad. So that's the rental side. On the sales side, people did go and buy places in Florida, and they bought country houses, and they expanded their real estate portfolio, but not everyone sold. In fact, most people did not sell. They held on to their real estate here, and they ended up having two places. And so some of those people, yes, decided to sell. They moved to Florida or whatever, but a lot of them didn't. And now, people are realizing maybe they have more fun in New York than they do in some other place. So you have people who are actually expanding here, having a bigger place here, or they want to have a fancier place here. So I would say the market here has benefited from people who felt like they could go long real estate. They could own more real estate because they felt like it was valued at a price they could buy a little bit more. Now, of course, mortgage rates notwithstanding, if they borrowed money because it was cheap, and then they maybe borrowed against their portfolio, but wealthy people made money, a ton of money since 2020. So I think ultimately the market I spend a lot of time in is not, I don't want to say immune, but has done very well in the last few years. And even people spending $1 million, $2 million in New York, as is true anywhere, are often getting help from family. So that generation up, even I know $1 million to $2 million sounds like a ton.
Yeah.
It's actually like starter apartments here in a
Yeah,
lot of
I know,
cases.
that's what's crazy.
They're getting help from family. So that sort of baby boomer generation is ultimately supporting the home buying in Manhattan, and I think in a lot of places.
So you see, I mean, right now you think the future's bright for New York. I mean, you sound very positive, very optimistic
I
in
think
real estate.
I think we'll see mortgage rates come down just a little bit over the next 6 months to a year. And during that time, more sellers. Here's the thing. People want to move forward with whatever they want to do. And you can throw a lot of things in the way, but eventually people are like, you know what? I'm not staying here. I want to do whatever I want to do. They want to upgrade. They have they have another kid. They get married. They want to downsize. They want to move closer to their kids in some other town. Eventually, life is calling, and we want to help them do that. So I'm actually I'm not optimistic to the point where I don't look at what's going on, but the writing's on the wall. As mortgage rates go down, this market is going to continue to pick up, and people will get used to the conditions that are here. Now, would I love taxes, real estate tax to go down? There are things I would love to help to move in the right direction that won't. But net, New York's an awesome place. I think it's the best city in America, maybe the world. People come visit. They love it here. You should come hang out and visit. It's a great place.
Okay, deal.
It's fall in New York it doesn't get better. Then it's just magnificent. So I think if people agree with me, that's the reason why real estate prices go up here is because so many people want to live here.
Wow. Yeah. Well, like I said, my brother loves it, and you've sure done a great job of selling it. It sounds like an amazing place. I still can't believe you don't have a car, but that'll be the next
I
one.
don't have a car. I don't have a driveway. I don't have a backyard. I went to a high school reunion and people are, scratching their heads in New Orleans. Wait a minute. You don't have a car? You don't, because most of the country has a very different way of going about their regular life.
Oh, it's probably 98% of the country has cars. I mean, we just don't not drive. I mean, that's just us. I mean, I drive around. There's never anybody but one person in a car, and it's really a waste when you think about it. So, well, our time has come quickly as always. And so I want to end this with just my standard question is, as you've gone through all this, you've been, grew up in New Orleans and then you went and chased bands around and promoted. And now you're a real estate mogul, we'll say at this point. And tell me if you think you were born or do you think you were made?
I would think I'm made. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I would say that I got a lot of help, from a lot of things, and I was able to find a way to do business that felt very much my own. So I used some of what I was born with, a lot of enthusiasm, curiosity,
optimism.
But becoming a real estate professional and helping people do what they want to do with their lives, I think it's very much a process of an evolution. So I feel like I'm made.
So what did you get your college degree in?
History and psychology.
There you go. I knew it. I was like, there's no way this guy got a degree in marketing. I'm like, you were made 100% sales guy, but to think history.
Yeah. I love hanging out I want to learn about everything and everyone and what makes them tick and try to figure out, just where they might fit into this crazy world,
That's awesome. Well, Scott, thanks for your time today. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for being on the Born or Made podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. They'll quit recording. Thank you very much. That was great. Enjoyed it. You did a great job. You're definitely a natural.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me.
Yep. Look forward to it. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Maybe I'll come to New York and I'll find you.
Hey, anytime. Just let me know.
All right. You got it. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye now.